Essos had never seen a ruler quite like her. After the liberation of Meereen, Astaper, and Yonkai, Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen, breaker of chains and mother of dragons, had a choice. Westeros, the land of her ancestors, called to her. But as the people of Meereen cheered her name, as the Harpies were driven back, and the wheels of slavery shattered beneath her dragon's fire, she saw something Westeros could never offer: devotion unearned by bloodlines. These were not her people by birth, but they had chosen her. And for once, she chose them back. She never boarded a ship for Westeros. Tyrion Lannister, clever and skeptical, advised otherwise. "The Iron Throne is yours by right," he had said. "Staying here is noble, but small." But Daenerys had grown wary of conquering. She had tasted the bloodshed in Meereen, watched the sons of the Harpies slit throats in alleys even after she had liberated them. She had seen that breaking. Chains did not always mend hearts. Westeros would only demand more war, so she stayed. Years passed. Meereen changed. The scars of war faded slowly, and justice replaced vengeance. Grey Worm led the Unsullied not as conquerors, but as protectors. Missandei became her chief advisor, beloved by the people, her words soft but weighted. The cities of slavers, Bay, now called the Free Cities of Essos South, formed a coalition fragile at first, but steady with time. Daenerys ruled not as queen, but as Khaleesi of Peace, a title bestowed by the people. Her dragons, once creatures of fury, soared above as symbols of protection, but the world did not stop moving because one dragon queen chose not to cross the sea. In Westeros, war dragged on. Cersei Lannister, without the looming threat of a Targaryen. Invasion grew bolder. She held King's Landing with an iron fist, her enemies too fractured to unite. The North still proclaimed Jon Snow its king, but without Daenerys' army, his influence never reached past the Neck. The White Walkers still marched, slower without Bran crossing the wall, but march they did. Ravens flew across oceans. Varys sent pleas. Tyrion begged her once more. Even Jon Snow came himself, sailing alone, to kneel and ask for help. "They will die," he said simply, "and with them, everything." Daenerys listened. Her silver-gold hair gleamed under Meereen's. Sun as she stood on the pyramid, watching Rhaegal and Viserion circle overhead. Drogon perched beside her, larger than any creature the world had seen in centuries. "I came to bring peace," she said. Not to chase another war. Jon did not argue. He merely left her a carved piece of dragonglass, shaped like a direwolf. "When winter comes," he said, "you'll hear it, even here." He was right. When the long night fell, it came silently, like frost biting through the edges of the world. At first, only whispers reached Essos. "A ruined castle here. A vanished. Hold fast there." But soon came the fireless skies, the reports of ice creatures walking beyond the wall, of the dead rising in droves. Then came the fall of Winterfell. Jon Snow's last raven spoke of darkness, of the walls shattering, of dragons in the night blue-eyed. And unnatural, one of hers, Viserion, taken by the Night King. She wept, not just for the dragon, but for what she had let die in her absence. Eso sphered what Westeros faced. The cold crept across the narrow sea in stories, in terrified refugees landing at ports screaming of death. The free cities began to shut their gates. But Daenerys remembered what Jon said. "You'll hear it." She did. One night, above Meereen, the sky shifted. Not with snow, but with silence. The stars dimmed. Drogon growled, wings spreading as if sensing a predator beyond the horizon. Rhaegal roared. It was coming. She looked out at her city, her people, her children, and realized peace was never the absence of war, but the will to fight for others. Without desire. And now she had to decide again. Stay and protect the life she built, or go and defend a world she never knew. She left at dawn. There was no parade, no speech, no banners waving in the wind. Only a single ship sailing west, flanked in the skies by Drogon and Rhaegal. Meereen watched in silence as their queen departed. Grey Worm stood on the dock, his face unreadable. Missandei wept softly, though she smiled. She had known, long before Daenerys admitted it, that this day would come. Daenerys could not ignore the storm rising beyond the sea, not when the sky itself trembled at its approach. They sailed through ghost waters. The narrow sea, once alive with merchant vessels, was nearly empty. Ports were closed, towns abandoned. Every stop they made told the same story. Winter had come, and with it, silence. When they reached Dragonstone, the castle was dark and broken. No fire burned in its halls, but it was hers by blood. The winds there whispered Valyrian secrets, as if welcoming a daughter returned. It was there that she saw what Westeros had become. Jon Snow had survived the fall of Winterfell. So had a handful of others: Tormund Johnspane, Samwell Tarly, even Arya Stark, her face harder, her eyes colder than any sword. They had retreated south, regrouping in the ruins of Harrenhal. The wall was gone. So was Eastwatch. So was the Vale. The north was ice and death. We fight with what we have, Jon told her. But it's not enough. She looked at the map. Half the realm was already in the dark. King's Landing still stood, though not untouched. Cersei had refused to evacuate. She built higher walls, burned the countryside, and turned the city into a fortress, but fire could not stop what was already dead. Daenerys looked at Jon and saw a man who had borne too much. She had known such pain. She reached for his hand. Then we fight with what we are. She did not sit the Iron Throne. Not yet. Not ever, perhaps. But she led again. The dragons flew. Rhaegal took the skies with Jon, while Drogon carried Daenerys. As she had once crossed the great grass sea, they burned the whites in valleys and woods. They rescued pockets of survivors trapped in frozen villages. They dropped food from the air to children starving in castles, surrounded by snow and corpses. It was not enough. For every 100 they saved, 1,000 more were lost. The Night King marched slowly but surely. His undead army was tireless, boundless, and now winged. Viserion, corrupted and wailing with blue fire, brought ruin to any who challenged him. Cities crumbled in hours. Blackwater Bay turned to ice. And then, at the edge of spring, the Battle of the Dusklands began. It was not planned. It erupted when the Night King turned south, sending his host toward King's Landing. The living had no choice. Cersei finally opened the gates, not out of mercy, but fear. Her golden company was shattered in the first wave. Qyburn's wildfire. Traps detonated, killing both white and man. The bells rang, not for surrender, but for help. And help came. From the north, Jon Snow with the remnants of the Northmen. From the sea, Theon Greyjoy with the last ships of the Ironborn. From the skies, Daenerys and her dragons, the last light before the dark. The battle lasted for days. Drogon burned through. The clouds, his fire unmatched. Rhaegal tore through the air beside him, green and wild. But Viserion met them in the sky, shrieking death. The three danced in fire and frost above the ruins of the Crownlands. On the ground, Arya moved like a shadow, killing whites in silence. Sam and Bran, protected by the last of the Night's Watch, held ancient secrets that could still turn the tide. Grey Worm led a vanguard of Unsullied, fighting with cold steel and unbending will. And Daenerys? She saw the Night King from the air standing, alone, watching his army with the calm of one who had already won. She knew this battle would not be won by numbers. It had to end with him. She dove. Drogon screamed. Fire met ice. The fire engulfed him. Drogon's breath lit the world, turning night into day. The sky pulsed red as the flames struck the Night King, a roaring inferno meant to erase him from existence. For a moment, the battlefield stilled. Lights paused mid-attack, their glowing blue eyes flickering. Even Viserion, undead and writhing in the sky, halted mid-flight, sensing the connection between master and magic. But when the fire cleared, the Night King still stood, unaffected, unmoving, smiling. Daenerys gasped. Drogon shrieked and climbed higher, wings beating like thunder as he spiraled above the battlefield, his queen clutching the saddle, heart pounding in disbelief. Below, the tide began to turn again. The dead surged forward. The fire had failed. And now the cost would be paid. The living fought harder, but the fear spread like poison. No fire could kill this enemy. Even Jon, his Valyrian steel blade slashing through death itself, began to falter. He saw the truth too clearly now. This war could not be won through battle alone. But there was another way. Bran Stark had waited. He had seen this moment before. Within the godswood of a ruined holdfast near Harrenhal, surrounded by a circle of weirwood stakes, he waited with Sam and a handful of sworn defenders. He had told them the Night King would come, not just to destroy, but to erase. And Bran, the three-eyed raven, was the memory of the world. He would come for him. And so he did. The Night King left the battlefield. His whites continued to march, driven by older commands. But he himself veered toward the northwestern edge of the war, toward the waiting boy in the wood. Daenerys saw him move. Jon screamed for her to follow. She understood. She turned Drogon mid-air, eyes locked on the distant shape of their enemy. This was the moment. Not fire, not steel, but sacrifice. The Night King reached the grove as the sky above darkened again. The clouds twisted. A storm began. Snow, wind. Silence. Bran did not move. His eyes were white, lost in visions. Sam stood at his side, clutching a dragonglass blade with shaking hands. Daenerys arrived as the Night King stepped into the circle. Drogon landed, scattering snow in waves. She jumped from his back, sword drawn, but something stopped her. Not fear, clarity. She looked at Bran, then at the Night King, and understood the cost. This magic, this curse, was older than any of them. A war between fire and ice that stretched back through ages. The Night King could not be burned, but he could be broken if the one who held both fire and life gave everything got. She stepped forward. Drogon roared. Jon reached the edge of the grove, just as she pressed her palm to Bran's shoulder. "I know what I must do," she said softly. "Tell them why." A wind swirled around her. Her hair lifted. Her eyes began to glow faintly. Bran opened his own, and for the first time, they were afraid. "Daenerys," Jon cried out, but it was already happening. Magic surged. The red of her dragon blood, the silver fire of her being, merged with the weirwood's pale roots. The Night King raised his blade to strike, but stopped, staggered. Crack. Then he screamed, not a sound of rage, but of rupture. His body split with light. His magic unraveled. The sky split open with fire. Drogon wailed in the air, wings extended, calling to his mother. And then the Night King shattered. All at once. Across the world, the whites collapsed. Dead fell still. Viserion mid-flight howled and exploded into frost and mist, vanishing like a dream ending. Daenerys crumpled to the snow. Bran collapsed beside her. Jon ran to her, falling to his knees, lifting her in his arms. Her breath was shallow, her skin glowing with fading fire. She looked at him, smiling gently. "Tell them, I chose them." Then she was still. The silence was immense. And then the dragons cried. The war was over. But no one celebrated. Snow continued to fall across the scorched fields, though now it was soft, not cruel. The White Walkers were gone. The dead would not rise again. But victory, if that's what it was, felt like ash. John. Snow buried her beneath the weirwood trees of the grove where she had fallen. Not in a tomb of stone, not behind walls built by men, but beneath the ancient roots of the world itself. The ground was frozen, but Drogon melted it with gentle fire. No pyre, no flames. She had already burned brighter than any star. Fire had been her gift and her burden. Grey Worm arrived days later, leading what remained of the Unsullied and the freedmen of Essos. They had sailed after her, disobeying her final command to stay. They fought in the final moments of the battle, but arrived too late to stop her sacrifice. When Grey Worm saw the grave, he did not speak. He knelt beside it and placed down the dagger she once used to cut her hand in an oath of peace. "She gave more than we deserved," he whispered, "and never asked anything in return." Missandei followed, tears frozen to her cheeks. She whispered a prayer in High Valyrian, the language they had all shared in Meereen. Her voice cracked, but she did not stop. Her queen had died, a savior, not a conqueror. Not a dragon, but a protector of all. John stayed behind after the rest departed, sat beside her grave for days, as snow turned the grove white and silent. He did not speak. He had lost everything again, but this time it was someone who had saved them all, not for glory, not for blood, but for love. Bran Stark woke after 3 days of silence. His eyes returned to the present, but something had changed. "She gave me her fire," he said simply. "And now I remember everything." He remembered the true origin of the Night King, not a villain born, but a weapon made. He remembered Valyria before it fell, the first dragon soaring the skies, and the first pact made between children and men. He remembered that fire alone could not save the world, but fire willingly given could unmake what magic had twisted. Daenerys had done what no dragon lord before her could. She had given freely, and thus broken the curse. Jon did not return to King's Landing. He refused the crown. "I am not meant to rule," he said, echoing words Daenerys once believed. She already did. Instead, the leaders of Westeros gathered at Dragonstone, the last place where fire had burned for life. Bran, now changed beyond his own understanding, spoke little but wisely. Sansa Stark came from the north, more hardened, more regal. Arya stood beside her, not as a lady, but as a guardian. Samwell Tarly brought the history of what had happened, and with it, the beginnings of a new story. They created something new. Not a throne of swords, but a circle of voices. A council of rulers, each kingdom allowed to govern itself, but tied to one another not by conquest, but by memory. Not the Iron Throne was melted by Drogon himself. After Daenerys' death, the great black dragon had flown into the sky with her body, disappearing for weeks. When he returned, he brought only ash and landed atop the melted, twisted remnants of the throne in King's Landing. He refused to move from it for days, mourning, roaring into the heavens. None dared go near him. When he finally left, the throne was gone. In its place, scorched stone and silence. A new age began. They called it the era of the Flame's End. But her legacy was not forgotten. Statues were carved, not of her seated on a throne, but standing among freedmen and children, her hand outstretched to lift rather than command. The people of Meereen sent emissaries across the sea to share her teachings. Her dream of peace, of freedom, of choice echoed far louder than any king's decree. In the end, Daenerys Targaryen never ruled Westeros, but she changed it more than any who ever did. Years passed, The wounds of the long night did not heal quickly, but they healed. The snow receded. Trees grew again in the riverlands. Grass returned to the fields that had been trampled under the boots of the dead. Children born after the war knew only whispers of what had come before, white-eyed monsters, burning dragons, and a silver-haired queen who gave her life to stop it all. Her name became legend in Westeros. Power changed hands not by bloodshed, but by choice. The Great Council met each year now, not to squabble for dominion, but to listen to what the people needed, what the realm demanded. It was not perfect, it was not peaceful, but it was better. For the first time in centuries, the words, "we are safer now," did not feel like a lie. Bran Stark, now called the Dream Watcher, became a living library of memory and vision. He did not claim a crown, though many offered it. Instead, he served as keeper of truth. From a seat carved into the stone at Harrenhal, surrounded by ravens and guarded by a silent order of former Night's Watch brothers, he ensured the past would not be forgotten. Sansa ruled the North as Queen in the Snow. The North remained independent, just as it had wanted. Her reign was cold and just, marked by slow rebuilding and alliances made with the free folk under Tormund. They shared watch over the new wall, not one of stone, but a line of watchtowers built to monitor the land, not separate it. Arya sailed west once, searching for the unknown. But she returned, changed, quieter. She never spoke of what she found, only that the world was wider than anyone imagined. She became Westeros' first official envoy to the new SOC League, the free cities in the south once ruled by masters, now governed by a council of elected leaders. They called themselves the Flameborn Pact. At the center of their seal was a dragon cradling a broken chain. ESSOS had not forgotten her either. Meereen had become a jewel of peace. Markets bustled. Schools taught history not just of kings and wars, but of justice, of equality. Missandei led the city for years, later joined by a council of scholars, former soldiers, and freedmen. Statues of Daenerys stood not as idols, but as reminders etched with the words, "Freedom must be chosen again, each day." Grey Worm never returned to Noth. After the war, he settled in the Summer Isles with those who survived. He trained warriors, not for war, but defense. He became a quiet man. Some said he prayed each night beside the sea, waiting for the sound of dragons again. And what of Jon Snow? He never returned to the politics of men. After Daenerys' death, he faded from the eyes of the world. He passed command of the Last Watch to new hands and walked into the wilderness of the North, beyond even the free folk. Some say he lived among giants. Others claim he became a hermit, growing old beside the icy lakes. But sometimes, on rare nights when the sky was clear and the wind carried strange echoes, travelers in the furthest reaches of the North swore they heard a dragon's cry. Sometimes, just sometimes, they saw a dark shadow in the sky. Dragon had never been found. He carried her body into the unknown, beyond maps, beyond the sight of men. But dragons remember. And somewhere in the world, he flew still alone perhaps, or not. The world changed, but the fire did not die. Songs were written of her. Not the fiery conqueror she might have become, but the gentle flame who chose to burn herself out so others could live. In old taverns, minstrels sang of the Stoneroom Queen who never took a crown. Her tale was one of loss, yes, but also of rebirth, of what could happen when power is used not for rule, but for sacrifice. Children in both Essos and Westeros learned her story before they learned the names of kings, and though her throne was never built, her legacy ruled the world. One spring morning in Meereen, a boy was born under a sky streaked with fire-red clouds. The midwives said it was an omen. His mother, a freedwoman who had once tended to Daenerys' gardens, named him Ramion after Rhaegal, the green dragon who had flown with Jon Snow during the final battle. But others in the city began calling him something else. The Flame's Return. He wasn't the only child named after the Dragon Queen. Across the world, in the north, a girl named Danya Stark was born with a shock of silver in her black hair, a rarity even for the ancient bloodlines of the first men. In the Summer Isles, a temple was built not in worship, but in honor. They called it the Hearth of the Mother, where people came to reflect, to choose peace, and to light lanterns in her memory. The world she left behind had not forgotten, but it had begun to grow. A new generation rose that did not remember the tyranny of the Lannisters, nor the weight of the Iron Throne. They grew up with tales of her not of dragons burning cities, but of a woman who listened, who freed slaves, who gave her life so that they might live in a world without shadows. Legends were not always accurate. Some said she had wings of her own. Others claimed she became a dragon after death, that she soared beside Drogon in the stars. The details didn't matter. What mattered was what she meant, and her legacy evolved into something greater than bloodlines or banners in King's Landing. Now the seat of the Grand Council, the ruins of the Red Keep were left untouched. No palace replaced it. Instead, the open space was turned into the Garden of Reckoning, where old swords once melted for the Iron Throne were buried beneath the earth. A single white tree stood in its center, surrounded by benches and quiet paths. On the western wall, carved in High Valyrian and the common tongue, were her last words. "Tell them I chose them." Tyrion Lannister, old now, visited that garden each year. He never returned to power. He became a writer, chronicling the war, the council, and Daenerys herself. His book, The Last Dragon, became one of the most read volumes in the known world. He did not paint her as perfect, but he made sure she was understood. She was flame, he once wrote, but not wildfire. She burned not to destroy, but to clear the path for something new. Even Cersei Lannister's memory, twisted and dark, was eventually buried under the weight of change. The people of King's Landing remembered the years of siege, famine, and cruelty. They remembered how she closed the gates, and how Daenerys, who had never even ruled them, had come to save them anyway. The great houses changed. House Baratheon faded, its bloodlines scattered and thinned. Gendry, legitimized by Daenerys long ago in Meereen, ruled Storm's End in her name for years, before stepping down to become a smith again. House Tyrell never returned to Highgarden, its lands now farmed by free folk who swore no oath but the one of community. House Lannister, humbled and quieted, kept to the Westerlands, choosing not to seek power again. The gold mines were dry now anyway. Only House Stark flourished, not in conquest, but in influence. Sansa's north remained independent, but offered counsel and aid to the southern realms. Arya, long after her travels, began training a new order of observers and peacekeepers who answered to no lord, wearing no sigils. They were called the Shadows of the Flame. In Essos, the cities of Astapor and Yonkai rose from the ruins. There, leaders formed what they called the Pact of the Freed. They met under banners bearing the dragon's wings over broken chains. They ruled not through inheritance, but by vote. And every year, on the date of the Battle of the Dusklands, bells rang across both continents, not in mourning, but in remembrance. A world once ruled by fire and steel had found new breath, not because a queen took a throne, but because she chose not to. Far to the east, beyond the ruins of Valyria and past the shadowlands of Ashai, strange tales began to emerge. Sailors returned to Volantis and Lys with stories of a hidden valley lit by red crystals and echoes of dragon wings in the dark. Spoke of a temple carved into a mountain, watched over by a single beast as black as midnight, with eyes that burned with eternal grief. Many dismissed it as fantasy. Others knew better. Drogon had not died. He had flown beyond the known world, carrying her body into the lands where fire still lived in the bones of the earth. There, where no man ruled, he watched over her. Whether her body was buried, entombed, or turned to ash by his own fire, no one could say. But the old priestesses of R'hllor began to whisper again, not of Azor Ahai, not of Stannis or Jon Snow, but of the mother of flame in the red temple of Volantis. Her image was painted beside the great fires. A woman not of prophecy, but of choice. Fire, they said, had found its true purpose in her, not to destroy, but to redeem. And a quiet new order began to spread, different from the old zealotry. They called themselves the Handmaids of Ash. They did not preach conquest or resurrection. They taught kindness, service, sacrifice. Jon Snow, wandering the far north in silence, never spoke of her again, but he felt her, sometimes in the wind, in the brief warmth before a snowstorm, in the glint of sunlight through icicles. He had seen too much, lost too many, to speak of ghosts. But one day, as he stood on the edge of a frozen lake beneath the northern lights, he saw a shape in the sky, a shadow, winged, black. Drogon. He did not follow. He only watched. And he wept. Back in Westeros, time continued its slow churn. The old gods and the new still had their followers, but faith had changed. No longer a tool of kings, it became a mirror. Septons began preaching humility. The faith of the Seven opened archives that had been hidden for centuries. Even the Iron Bank of Braavos, once cold and ruthless, began offering loans not to crowns, but to rebuilding efforts in the poorest regions of Westeros. The world was shifting, and her name was always near. Daenerys, not queen, not tyrant, not conqueror, just Daenerys. In taverns, young girls pretending to be her, wearing cloaks of bedsheets and riding broomstick dragons. In libraries, scholars debated her choices, her failures, her sacrifice. And always, in the back of every mind, was the question, what if she had taken the throne? Would the world have changed faster? Or would it have burned? But it didn't matter. Now, what mattered was what did change, because she never sat on it. Tyrion, near the end of his life, was asked in an interview by a young scribe, what made her different from all the others? He thought long before answering. She didn't want the world to remember her, he finally said. She just wanted to make sure there was a world to remember. The final volume of his memoirs was titled The Fire That Chose to Die Out. It became controversial, praised in some circles, scorned in others. But no one could ignore the last line. She was not the last dragon. She was the first human to understand what being one truly meant. Time, as it always does, smoothed the sharpest edges of memory. Generations passed. The council system that replaced the monarchies of old adapted with the ages. Kingdoms became regions, then communities, bound more by trade and common law than by blood or banners. The stories of the Long Night faded into myth. Its horrors turned to symbols. Children learned the snow demons and fire queens in the same breath as fairy tales. But one name never faded. Daenerys. Not because she ruled, but because she chose not to. Not because she conquered, but because she protected. She had become a parable, a beacon proof that strength was not measured in crowns taken or cities burned, but in the power to walk away. She had 3 dragons, and yet gave herself instead. She had every right to claim the world, and chose instead to save it. In Meereen, her birthday became a day of celebration across the Essosi League. People wore white and gold, released paper dragons into the sky, and read from a book called The Broken Wheel, written by Missandei before her death, a book that explained how peace was never permanent, but always worth pursuing. In the north, under a blossoming weirwood grove, an order of healers and listeners tended to broken souls, training orphans and war survivors in the ways of service and remembrance. They called themselves the Chained Flame. Even in King's Landing, beneath the stars where once stood the Iron Throne, people gathered once a year to light candles, not in mourning, but in quiet gratitude. Not for a queen, for a choice. One day, a child wandered into the Garden of Reckoning. She was about 10, with a wooden dragon tied to her belt and curious eyes. She stopped in front of the white tree at the garden's center and asked an old man sitting nearby, who was she? The man paused, looking up at the carving on the wall. He smiled gently. His hair was silver now, but his eyes still held a hint of mischief and regret. Tyrion Lannister had not died, yet not quite. She was someone who could have been anything, he said, his voice raspy, and decided to be what no one else dared to be. The child looked at the inscription again. Tell them I chose them. Did she really say that? He nodded. To the last, she chose us over herself. That's why we're still here. She sat beside him quietly, and he passed her a tattered book. Read this, he said. Then you'll. No. The stars came out above them, one by one. And high above, beyond sight, some say Drogon still circled the world vast and watchful, the last of his kind, searching, guarding, grieving, but also, perhaps, content. He had watched the world change, watched her dream live, a world not built by fire and blood, but by choice. The fire that once burned to conquer now lived in stories, in statues, in songs, and in hearts. Not as fear, but as warmth. In that, above all else, was her victory. Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen never ruled Westeros, but she saved it. And in the end, that was far greater.